disappeared.
Just do it on stage. Yeah. Play.
Bonjour.
Good evening. Welcome to the museum at MFIT's Fashion Culture Fashion Culture series. My name is Tania Melendez Escalante, and I am Senior Curator of Education and Public Programs. It is my honor to introduce Marie-France Pochna, who will present her book, Christian Dior Destiny. It is Dior's official biography, and it reveals the secretive and surprising man who revolutionized fashion. The book offers new insights on his spirituality and relationships, as well as a contemporary perspective on his legacy. Marie-France is an expert on fashion and trends in the luxury market, a professor and a TV producer. After our conversation, Marie-France will sign books by the entrance of the theater. Right now, I ask you to please silence your cell phones and devices, and please join me in welcoming Marie-France Pochna.
Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you.
It is so great to have you here tonight. You flew all the way from France to be here with us today, so thank you. And I guess the first question to ask is, how did you decide to write a biography on Christian Dior?
How did I decide it? It was in 1984, actually. Well, Dior, in any case, was everybody in my generation knew that the man was a legend. And in 1984, suddenly, I decided to write about Christian Dior because there was a big turn. He was still... I've got to give the dates of Dior first. He was born in 1905. He started his career as designer and as couturier quite late in 1947. And his life was quite battered by quite a number of complications before he could succeed. And, but nevertheless, when he created that extraordinary sort of event, a monument, and an extraordinary event, which was the new look on February 12th, 1947. The world stopped. The world stopped absolutely, because he created such a beautiful vision of femininity. At the time, women wanted to look feminine because they were just getting out of the war. And they had been deprived of food, of the possibility of buying nice clothes, of the possibility of being festive. So, of course, they really returned to what is the essential in life. You want to be beautiful, and you want to have fun. And so Christian Dior absolutely completely translated that mood into that fashion, in which women were looking basically like flowers, like angels, like dancers. And the new look was, exactly the explanation, the demonstration of that fashion. But I want to go back to why I decided to write about Christian Dior at a specific date, which was 1984, because at that time, Christian Dior, the House of Dior, was going through some difficulties because it was part of a consortium, a big company called Boussac, that had bought a lot of companies and that suddenly was becoming bankrupt. And a new era was beginning. Dior had not been absolutely, his reputation, not his aura had not diminished whatsoever. As I said, I mean, he remained a legend throughout from 1947 through to 1957, 10 years' time. And so at that time, there was another actor on the scene, a financier, a businessman that you may have heard the name of, called oh là là, je m'en souviens plus. Bernard Arnault. Do the name Bernard Arnault ring a bell for some of you? today he's the most successful Frenchman. He's probably one of the richest men on the planet. And did you answer that you had met, you knew about him? Yes. Okay. So it was as the company the company Dior that had been very profitable and very successful. At the end, it was owned by a consortium that became bankrupt, as I said. And when Bernard Arnault arose in 1984, he suddenly introduced a new era where Dior would become even more successful than it had ever been, and better known. The brand would be better known than it had ever been. So I thought it was interesting to get involved in that because I had already met a number of people working for the Dior company, and it was the timing was perfect because as there were still people alive, I could really carry a lot of interviews. I must have interviewed about 300, 400 perhaps people, both in France and in America also, as we will see, because the focus of our conference is about Dior success in America. And so that was the reason why I got involved in it. And that the book started, the first book that I did on Dior was called The New Look, simple. And it was published in 1996. 1996. And the second book which I wrote, which was an augmented edition, was published in 2021, just 2 years ago. And there's a great difference between the first one and the second one. It's their size. The first one was about 300 pages, and this time it was the current one is 600 pages, because there is so much to tell about Dior, so much to tell about him, and I really wanted I was focusing mostly on the idea of the man, the portrait of the man, the personality of the man, the extraordinary man that he was behind the legend and behind the genius. He's a genius in two ways, I should say. He's a genius first in one thing because doing things out of the extraordinary is what I call to be a genius. And the first part of his genius was to be, first of all, et couturier, as we will talk about. We will enter more into the detail of the new look. You will see that he created something which was absolutely beauty itself. But the other characteristic of his personality is also to have been a fantastic, I would say, extremely talented businessman. Nothing led him to become an entrepreneur, and he discovered his call of being an entrepreneur precisely by the Americans when he came to visit America. It's extraordinary what happened. His transformation from a French businessman, for a French couturier that had never managed a big empire, into he caught actually what we would call the fever, the American fever for business. He caught it there and transformed himself to the point where he amused some of his friends who knew him from what they knew of him was just that he was a couturier. And Dior was calling himself, but I'm a self-businessman too, of course, implying that he had sort of acquired that from the Americans.
And so when we're talking about Dior, I guess we should start from the beginning. Can you tell us a little bit about his family background?
Yes, he was born in a place that you may have never have heard about. It's a port on a harbor on the channel called Granville. He was born in Granville in 1905, and in a very, very nice environment. His mother had created a garden full of flowers, of course, but I mean particularly roses and lilies of the valley. And she instilled and she had a tremendous energy to create absolutely something like, if we see the slides, you can see the house, and you will see also a slide in which Christian Dior expresses what his feeling was about his youth. Can we have this slide after? Yes. Well, the slide that we're looking for is not appearing, but at least what you can see, it probably will come after. I'm sorry, I came too early. No, let's go back. I want to introduce to you the family of Christian Dior. This is his mother, very pretty woman, very elegant. And she was the one who inspired in him the desire to also, the desire to become a gardener. But gardener is a small word for defining someone who loves nature and who really has a passion for nature and for making things beautiful. So he adored his mother, and his relationship lasted all his life. I want to introduce you also on the next slide to, this just shows that the Granville had two qualities, two peculiarities. It was, first of all, a fishing port, a fishing harbor, I would say, and a casino. It had attracted a much more chic clientele. But if we go back to Christian Dior's first aspirations, what he loved was Granville was also a place where, as I said, a fishing harbor, and Christian Dior was absolutely enthused with what the institution called the carnival. The carnival was the period in the year where the boats were coming back from Chile, where they had been fishing guano. And guano was an interesting thing because it was probably, you know what guano was. It's not a very delicate word to say, because guano was precisely precisely the cause of the fortune of Christian Dior's father and Christian Dior's family. In 3 generations, they had become the most important manufacturers of fertilizers in France, and due to guano, which once you transform it becomes a very strong fertilizer. Christian Dior was never really attracted by his father's métier, his father's trade, and he was in fact completely more oriented, being much more poetic, much more artistic, and had a real complicity with his mother. So as world went by, he continued, he enjoyed the carnival to a great degree, because it gave him the possibility to dress and to make design, festive dresses, festive disguises for his girlfriends, and have great fun. Because Christian Dior is defined by, first of all, passion, by joy, by the idea of making the world a better place. This is really this is his personal dimension. So we want to speak about, what is the next question?
Well, you touched upon his love for the arts. And
Yes.
In the 1920s, we had the Roaring 20s, right?
Yes.
And that had a great influence on Mr. Dior. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
So yes, we can talk about, that's a very good question. Yes, although he lived in Granville, the parents also had an apartment in Paris, and the 20s, the Roaring 20s, which we all know about, was really the beginning, was something that completely changed Christian Dior was very happy to leave his family cocoon and sort of join a group of friends that he had found at the lycée, wherever, which were like him, interested in art, interesting in music, and so he connected with them, and they all sort of. I've got to take my text because I think it's best if I read my text. By nature, Christian Dior, Paris of the 20s was a revelation for these youngsters, for the group of Christian Dior, for all these youngsters. Crowded streets, packed theaters. At that time, as you know, the music was black, the ballets were Russian, and they had made a startling appearance with Nijinsky as a star. And the little group of friends with Christian Dior found their mecca at a place called the Bœuf sur le Toit, the beef on the roof in English, you would say, a rather sort of exotic name, intriguing name, a piano bar founded by a fashionable crowd, and the bar was an instant success. And this, if you can see this on the next image, on the top image on your left, this represents the participants, I mean the people who were attending this bar, all poets, musicians, artists, well-known people at the time, Jean Cocteau, among them you have Jean Cocteau, and all these, Christian Dior and his friends were edging at the end corner of the bar. You may see them in the image underneath, and the bar, sitting on stools, and could not get enough of watching all the gods of the arts, such as Jean Cocteau, as I mentioned, Pablo Picasso, Stravinsky, Francis Poulenc, Darius Milhaud, who are well known. They formed a group of musicians that are called the Group of Six, and they were in full steam at that time. And Dior caught the fever of the arts, painting. At this particular time, the Surrealist appeared, the Dadaist appeared. So it was really a movement where all the arts were flourishing at the same time. Painting, theater, music, ballets were rocked by the winds of liberation. Christian had carefully hidden from his parents his solitary jaunts to discover Paris that both fascinated and shaped him. And it's a wonder that he managed to pass his two baccalaureate in 1923, so therefore he was 17 at that time. His parents considered that it was time that he decides what he would do as a career, and they sort of had a discussion together. He said that he wanted to be at the École des Beaux-Arts, the great beautiful arts, and his parents were utterly, and to become an architect. His parents were utterly unprepared for this announcement. From his position as a company president, Maurice Dior, of course, pictured the École of the Beaux-Arts as a wretched place. This was a place where artists who were there would never be striving and would be like Gauguin or Van Gogh, and ending making absolutely no money. So he didn't want his son to be in that particular place. So he could have thought that his mother would be on his side, considering their shared affinities for homes and gardens. But she was even more adamant, and so Christian Dior was forced to settle with his bourgeois parents and to accept to enroll at something which would give him what they would say would be a serious education, and that institution that they directed him to, in spite of what he wanted to do, was called the École des Sciences Politiques, forming ambassadors, ministers, people in the administration, absolutely, completely far away from his particular his particular tendencies, his affinities, and you could see that there was really quite a divide between the parents and the son. They didn't see the same world. And so anyway, he managed to do that, and for the time being, I accepted to do what his parents wanted to do. But his years of dilettante, going through all the places of Paris where you had artists, where you had music, where you had ballets, where you had great artists, all these talents that he developed would prove fruitful later. At the time, he would be in fashion. The time will come. He could use his vast array of artistic passions. He was himself a musician. He had learned music. He painted very well, and he has also a great sense of choreography. His passion infused his collection with the magic of music, dance, and literature. Another image. Yes, we could change the slide if you want to move it. This represents a pergola that Christian Dior designed during his summer in 1927 to please his mother. The Villa Les Rums was overlooking the sea, and it was a very beautiful sort of location, and Christian Dior thought of creating a pergola for his mother that would please her, to invite her guests for tea and have nice conversation and play balls and that kind of thing. Surprisingly, the parents did not connect this with the fact that he wanted to be an architect. In fact, he also wanted to show them by that particular creation that his talent was to be an architect, that forgot, but there was never a row between the parents and the son. And in spite of their contradictions, things went along quite well. In any case, this particular summer, he was not supposed to do an artistic work or not to build a pergola. He was supposed to be at Les Rams and spending the 3 months of summer to revise his exams that he had already made, that he had failed at, in order to be able to remain at Sciences Po. Otherwise, he would be exited. And unfortunately, it's exactly what was predictable. That is exactly what happened, because in doing the villa, he of course didn't prepare his exams, and at the end he had sort of finished. He has sort of sealed his fate at Sciences Po, who said, "Thank you. You can go to another institution. We cannot take you for next year, nor forever." The parents, Mr. Dior probably realized in the meantime that he had made a mistake by orienting his son into this. And so, as I said, the family was sort of quite together. And Christian Dior revealed his intention. So Christian Dior revealed his intention. Then Mr. Dior said to his father, "What do you want to do now?" And Christian Dior responded that he wanted to associate himself in an art gallery with a friend, Jacques Monjean. The art market was in a good phase at the time. We were still in the 25th. And his father accepted to invest, and the gallery had a promising start. Dior referred to these as vintage years. This didn't quite last. If we go on to the next lesson, and as you can see Christian Dior in his gallery, he exposed Picasso, he exposed Matisse, he exposed all kinds of artists, Max Ernst, and the gallery was very successful and well attended to. A lot of Americans had chosen to come and live in Paris during these years because they felt that it was very pleasant. The life was extremely pleasant. And you had a poet like Virgil Thomson, or you had Gertrude Stein. Gertrude Stein was living in Paris quite permanently, and she was coming to visit the gallery quite often, just for the good reason that it was close to the place where she was giving a shampoo. She was the place where she was treating her dog. And so he met, and they had lots of interesting people that came, and the gallery was really a success for quite a while. And but these golden years, what?
No, go on.
These yes, you see that on this, you see the portrait of his mother, sort of.
Yeah, and so in 1931, right? The family faced a series of tragedies that really shaped what happened to Christian Dior next. So what was so significant in that year?
Well, what was very significant in 1931 was, first of all, the death of Mrs. Dior. You can see already on this photo that her face has completely changed from the first images you had seen. She was thin. She was young, of course, but she was not that old here, but she was just, in fact, completely tortured by the disease that affected their second son, their third son, Bernard, who had a sort of a strange attitude. He was not really very stable, and he was diagnosed with schizophrenia. And of course, her heart was broken when the specialist that was treating him said that he had to be put into an asylum where he ended his life. Her elder son, called Lucien, had also sufferings that he had supported, that he was still carrying after the First World War. He was the only one in his battalion to have survived after the battle, what is called the Battle of the Marne. So the family was in fact also. So Christian Dior wrote in his memoirs that the death of his mother, whom I adored, marked me for life. It was really a very, very short, very, very great, terrible moment for him. And soon after, there was another drama, the father's ruin. The consequences of the Wall Street crash in 1929 reached Europe 8 years later. No, not 8 years, but a few years later. And Maurice Dior had made investment in real estate which turned bad, causing him to lose his entire fortune. All the family possessions had to be sold at auction. What he had done is he had sold his stock in the family company in order to invest in real estate, being a good father, having realized that none of his sons were really destined to enter in the family business. He wanted to secure their future, and he bought to buy real estates that would protect them. So these good intentions were not rewarded, and the catastrophe happened. He had to, when he realized that all his possessions were sold, the beautiful furniture, the house itself, Christian was forced to close his workshop, the atelier, the art gallery. And at the time, the works of art having become unsellable at this time of recession, he was really found himself penniless. And after months, he found really penniless and suffering hungriness. And after months of vicarious living, putting his health in danger, he caught tuberculosis. You thought you were entering into a world of beauty, charm, and happiness. And this is going to come, obviously. But this is to tell the truth about his story, and that his life was marked by very violent contrast. The thing about Christian Dior, however, that in hardship he was very courageous, very full, a great deal of dignity, and there was also something else that pulled him in his character, as he was someone who was completely oriented towards beauty, happiness, and and all that, and rejoicing, happy life. This kind of kept him, away from being too. He kind of sort of chased away unhappiness. He had that particular thing. After 8 months, and also another thing that helped him tremendously during that period was the fact that Christian Dior was never without friends, and he was never without friends, and his friends in bad times or in good times. And after 8 months, all the friends all contributed to help him. They all contributed to paid for his tuberculosis treatment, which was really something that showed how friendly this group was, and to stay. And after 8 months, he could return to Paris. On this diapositive, you can see Henri Sauguet. Henri Sauguet was. Where we have moved to another one. After 8 months, he could return to Paris, where Jean Eusen, the friend we saw on the previous diapositive slide, had just come to visit him when he was doing his cure. It was in the Pyrenees, but after 8 months, it was. I think I have a difficulty continuing the conference. I'm so sorry. I have to apologize.
It's okay.
I've been very disturbed by this trip, as you know.
Yes.
So after 8 months, he could return to Paris, where Jean Eusen, the character that you see here, was a writer, invited him to stay in his apartment. The apartment was very pleasant. It was because he was looking at the Seine, and he was sharing this apartment with his boyfriend, a very nice young American called Max Kenna, who was a designer. And Max Kenna spontaneously proposed to Christian Dior, who was now living with them, to teach him the basic rules of dress design. Christian Dior learned fast, he was enthusiastic, so he was really now getting out of the tunnel, and for good, and his life, bright and beautiful, was suddenly unroll itself under his feet. He sketches at life and showed immediately he had talent. He had success selling his designs to fashion magazines. In 1938, the leading couturier, Robert Piguet, offered to employ him full-time, and success immediately showed. We have to change the slide there. A model called Café Anglais that he created for his first collection for Piguet was called A Sensation and was published in Women's Wear Daily. This is the beginning of Christian Dior's success, and it will never stop. You wanted me to, and then Christian Dior after that was hired by Lucien Lelon and continued his career, and his career continued at Lucien Lelon. So you wanted to ask the question about astrology?
Sure.
Yeah, because we are now completely in another way. No. This has gone too fast.
Well,
you wanted to talk about astrology.
yes. And so Christian Dior had a great interest in astrology. What would you tell us a little bit about that, please?
Yes. Christian Dior's favorite part. Now we are getting into the holly, happy-go-lucky Christian Dior. Christian Dior's favorite pastime has always been card games. He was obsessed with certain numbers, number 8 in particular, which will become fundamental. We will see that later in his creation. Friday 13th was, for instance, a day which he considered auspicious for meetings, and important decisions could not be taken without consulting his astrologist, Madame de Laye. You see Madame de Laye standing next to him in front of this astrologist thing. And Madame de Laye, this is quite a striking aspect of Christian Dior's personality. And in fact, he introduced this fact in his memoirs. Christian Dior wrote a book called Christian Dior and I in 1957, in which the book becomes, by this strange statement, the most important feature of my life. I should be both ungrateful and untruthful if I fail to acknowledge it from the start, has been my good luck. I must bow also to the fortune tellers who predicted it. This is what he said. So, once it was known that Christian Dior wanted to leave Lucien Lelon, things moved fast, and he received an offer from Marcel Boussac, founder of a textile empire, he was the richest and most powerful man in France at the time. But Christian Dior was a little bit reluctant because he felt that if he associated with such a tycoon, he would lose his freedom of independence to run the house he wanted to create. So Madame de Laye was consulted, his astrologist was consulted, and she said to him, you must create the house of Christian Dior, whatever the conditions are. Nothing will ever compare with the chance you're open now. Christian Dior had confidence in this astrologist because his beloved sister Catherine, aged 22, had been engaged in the resistance, and because he entrusted he had a complete confidence in his astrologist. His beloved sister Catherine, aged 22, had decided to engage in the resistance and had been arrested and tortured in an absolutely horrible way by the Gestapo and sent to concentration camp in Ravensbrück. Of course, Christian Dior couldn't sleep, and Madame de Laye had consistently predicted that Catherine would come back alive, and she was indeed liberated in May 1955. So another motive. So Christian Dior really never, would not live. You understand why he would never live without his astrologist. I want to come back now to something that will lead us to what is soon going to become, which is the event of the new look, and which is Christian Dior's attraction for numbers. And the number 8 is his favorite lucky number. Synonymous. Why? It is because if you look in the science, the number 8 is synonymous with eternity. And if you look at it has a strong resonance with Christian Dior's creations, because if you look at number 8, you can also look at the hourglass. An hourglass has the shape of the 8, right? And an hourglass can be seen either vertically or can be seen horizontally. So horizontally, if you put the hourglass horizontally, you see the figure 8. representing, in fact, someone lying on the floor, and perhaps a woman. And if you put the hourglass in a vertical position, what you see is, in fact, also can sort of represent the silhouette of a woman. And that's what Christian Dior was aiming at. He said that he wanted, his ambition was to enhance the proportions of the female body. And that's what we will see when the Christian Dior, in the next chapter, when we see the Rachel. His obsession with the number 8 was also seen in the fact that the company Dior was founded on October 8, after Christian Dior had decided to associate himself with Marcel Boussac and receive his money to create his company. The headquarters, the Avenue Montaigne, which is the location of Christian Dior, was founded on October 8, 1946. The business started with 8 workshops. The building, Avenue Montaigne, had 8 floors, so you can see how obsessive Christian Dior was about numbers. His comment on appelle ça? His superstition went to the extreme of, for instance, when he was presenting his collection, he asked his driver to turn around the block, perhaps sometimes 8 times, until he would enter. He was feeling so, voilà, in any case. So you see also on that picture the pictures of Christian Dior's beloved sister, who was quite an extraordinary woman and who survived, and who was a woman who continued her life happily by also raising fruits and raising flowers, and continuing on the tradition of the family, which is to make beautiful gardens and make the world a beautiful place. So,
so here we have this phrase that Dior was ahead of his time in every way. He was infallible. He always knew what was beautiful before anyone else. But there were 2 American journalists, and here we are bringing back this connection between Christian Dior and the United States, who are labeled Uncle Sam's fairy godmothers. Can you talk about who these 2 women are and how they influenced Christian Dior's career?
I call them fairy godmothers because they were really badly needed. Because at the time when Christian Dior created his collection in 1947, it was still close to the time of the war, and it was very dark times for Paris and for France, and people didn't dare doing wild collections like he was going to do it. He was a bit of a provocateur. So you didn't have many, and France was so poor at the time that we had bread lines. A lot of the country was destroyed. We had strikes. We always have strikes. We still have strikes, but we had strikes, and we had 3 million people on strike for good reason, because there were no jobs. So the context in which Dior presented the new look was certainly not favorable. So that's why it was interesting to have a little bit American blood coming, and these 2 journalists that came. First of all, there was a constant current of fashion journalists who were coming to Paris every year, every season, to see the collection. And these were the most famous. They were called Carmel Snow and Bettina Ballard. Bettina Ballard was the chief of American Vogue, and her alter ego, Carmel Snow, was at Harper's Bazaar. And these 2 women had really completely different character. One was very, I would say, Protestant in her attitude. It was Bettina Ballard. She had experience with the American office of Vogue in Paris, and she thought that because people were arriving late at the office, that they were very unprofessional, and she had a low opinion about French fashion. And while Carmel Snow, on the contrary, can we see them? Can we see them? I think we missed them. No? Yes, here they are. Stop on that image. So Carmel Snow and Bettina Ballard, they're sitting where they should be, sitting close to one another. Carmel Snow is the one who is on the right side, and Bettina Ballard is on the left side. And Carmel Snow was really a character. As you can see, not a particularly beautiful woman. She was full of energy and good cheer, and she relished Paris and France and was overcome with compassion for the wartime tribulations of French couture. She had been moved by Lucien Lelon. I know I didn't speak about that yet, so I want to talk about it now. And so it was so important to have them, and both, in any case, even Bettina Ballard, who was more critical about the French, had been absolutely moved by Christian Dior when she had asked if she could meet this new designer, this new couturier that was suddenly the hype of Paris, which was quite an extinct city. When Christian Dior moved in, he was, first of all, he blushed. He was very timid. That was his character. And so she was, she felt like the love of a mother for him. And so she had sort of slightly changed in his sympathy in his direction. And Carmel Snow, on the contrary, who had been convinced by Christian Dior right from the beginning. So the summer collections were presented in February, on February 12th at 10:30. It was one of those days that just never quite seemed to get going. Paris had been liberated 2.5 years earlier, but the mood of the nation was dark. This did not discourage a group of well-dressed women on wedge-heeled shoes from gathering at 10 o'clock in the morning outside the grey canopy at the entrance of Avenue Montaigne. The two Americans, I'm missing again.
So here on the screen we have a very famous image of the new look. So we're almost running out of time. So could we talk about some of the images that we have on the screen, and if you could please just describe what's going on in these scenes.
So this is the presentation of the new look as it was, the first thing. I would suggest, in fact, that we go to the American part, don't you think? I think so, because as you can see, I'm kind of lost. I'm not in a good shape.
Sure. So these are some images of the new look fashion show, right? The first fashion show that we're showing you here. And this is an image of the first-class staff, that Christian Dior assembled for his company, a company that was meant to grow from being just a French couture company to become a global powerhouse that we know today.
I still think we should say what the Americans, we've talked about this, I'm sorry, it's just so going in all directions, but I think we should perhaps, just before turning the page on the new look, which you see some of the most wonderful models, we should perhaps give your audience, who is so patient and so nice, the reaction of the two American journalists.
Yes, so what did they write about the new look?
So they watched the new look. The new look was introduced, first of all, by a model called Marie-Thérèse, and the audience was mesmerized. Once they saw, the first thing they saw is a pleated skirt was swirled by and a remarkable strut. 1, 2, 3 models followed at the same rhythm, twirling a skirt with a 22-yard circumference, had tilted over an eye, gloved hands. That walk, that figure, it wasn't a dream. It was her, the embodiment of femininity, a creature with voluptuous curves, as you say, Stuart, astounding in her appearance, a combination of folly and elegance, and above all, sure of herself. Astonished, the ladies watching, the ladies who were guests at the fashion show, watching were actually pulling pulling on their short, straight skirts and square-shouldered packets and square-shouldered jackets, which was the fashion at the time, and they were plucking unconsciously on their hams, feeling completely appropriate to show their knees. Oh, yes, I'm so sorry. Applause broke out and didn't stop. 85 dresses were presented from 2 lines, Corolla and Figure 8, which reinvented the proportions of the female body to make it more graceful. Behind his curtain, Christian Dior covered his ears. The torrent of cheers frightened him. The 2 American journalists, that's the point I wanted to come to because they actually made the show, were enthralled. The performance had far surpassed their expectations. We were given a theatrical performance such as we'd never seen in a couture house before, wrote Bettina Ballard, the one who was a little bit low in the beginning. We were witnesses to a revolution in fashion and to a revolution in showing fashion as well. The editorial staff of Harper's Bazaar in New York had been in shock since the previous evening when Carmel Snow had telegraphed the message, keep a lot of space for Christian Dior in the magazine. She was and then keep a lot of space for Christian Dior in the magazine. And she was the first one to congratulate the couturier and to also carve the world that was going to be the definitive description of this fashion. And she ran to him and she said, "It's quite a revolution, dear Christian. Your dresses have such a new look." The word was coined, and the name was in all the newspapers the next day over the planet. Before she had even left the building, her famous words began to make their way around the world. That was what everyone now wanted from Paris, said Bettina Ballard. This is her words. Never has there been a moment climatically right for a Napoleon, an Alexander the Great, a Caesar of the couture. Paris fashion was wanting to be seized and shaken in given direction. There's never been an easier and more complete conquest than that of Christian Dior. And Carmel Snow continued the same, I won't say. Christian Dior was ushered into the big salon and welcomed with a storm of applause. Soon his face was covered in lipstick marks. As long as I live, he said, whatever triumphs I may win, nothing will ever exceed my feelings of that supreme moment. Alors, so I think now what we should perhaps do, we should talk about his first-class stuff.
We have like 5 minutes left.
No, alors, so we are...
Should we
no.
go to the United
so
States
So what I
part?
think what we should just do is talk about...
Because and here I'm going to, there's some really interesting things that happened with the new look in the United States. There's the reactions of the American women
yes.
about the new look,
yes.
Which we are just talking about now, but also the way that the United States transformed Christian Dior and his business. So maybe we can just have a conversation about that, because I think that is really interesting to think of how this country was so influential in a brand that's very French. And Marie-France denominates this whole process the American honeymoon, which is what we have on the screen, right? So here he is, and here's Mr. Dior entering the United States. So,
yes, Christian Dior arrived in the United States at the invitation of someone called Stanley Marcus. Probably the name is still means something. And Stanley Marcus had created an Oscar of the fashion, and that he gave to Christian Dior, which is what is represented on that video. And they became kind of friends. And right?
They
became, yes. And Christian Dior was quite, yes, I think we missed one slide, which is the one where we have the women sort of, the suffragettes in the...
Maybe it's there they
yes,
are.
Yes, Christian Dior was Christian Dior, first of all, despite when Christian Dior arrived in America, he sort of stopped in, stopped in New York. And in New York, he was welcomed by a series of suffragettes that were quite right in their own way, because they thought that American women didn't need to wear these extravagant hats that could hardly pass the doors, wear gloves during the day was much too complicated for women who were free, who drove and who had jobs, much more advanced than the French women at the time. So they sort of marched in the streets against him. So he had been a bit frightened by that, and he was quite relieved when he arrived in Dallas and when Mr. Stanley Marcus was waiting for him. Both immediately hit it on immediately. They spoke about art, they spoke about cinema, they spoke about all sorts of things, and in fact they remained friends all their life. And what was great, that because as demonstrations were held, the New Look made the front page of all newspapers, but you didn't know which way it was going to go, whether American women were going to be against it or for it. And that was Dior's luck. He was in good hands with Stanley Marcus. Upon seeing Christian Dior's collections, he was immediately enthusiastic, and he said, he continued to believe, he said, I had never seen anything so sensational. And he was also, because he was a very pragmatic person, he was the first one to realize that how the industry, the American industry, could benefit from a radically different style, because during the war everything had been stopped. There were limitations. His understanding was the more, but yes, the L65, the L85 restriction on fabric was just being repealed at the time that Christian Dior arrived, and that's what Stanley Marcus sort of imposed upon. He surrounded himself with all his competitors, Saks Fifth Avenue, Bergdorf Goodman, Marshall Field, and Chicago, and he convinced them of the New Look's potential to revive American fashion manufacturing and kickstart the US fashion industry if American women embraced fast fashion. His judgment echoed that that of the powerful Carmel Snow, the oracle of fashion, the one we've already met, who was pushing for renewed contact with Paris to stimulate the imagination of US designers. They'd all heard the oracles, it's Carmel Snow saying on the radio, Dior saved Paris, as Paris was saved in the Battle of the Marne. Those who had missed the New Look at his first appearance will have to hop on the plane to visit the Avenue Montaigne. She was so orderly. Meanwhile, Marcus and Dior had discovered they had a perfect chemistry, and that the self-effacing little Frenchman suddenly became an ambassador for French culture to America. Department stores around the country rolled out the red carpet for him in San Francisco, in Chicago, and by the time he ended his trip back in New York, American fashion had turned in his favor. Just simple as that.
And we'll move on to November 8th of 1948.
Yes, that's a very good idea.
What happened in that auspicious date?
What happened was that November 8, 1948, because what had happened in the meantime is that Christian Dior had understood that what he wanted to do was to create his own establishment in the United States. He was not going to sort of remain at selling from Paris. So on November 8, 1948, he opened his first establishment on Fifth Avenue, and it took for a while. Christian Dior's luck, again, on November 8, 1948, Dior's lucky number had been chosen intentionally. Lavish bouquets greeted the guests who had been invited to view Christian Dior's first collection, created in the United States. In New York, all New York's best-dressed women were all there, including Marlene Dietrich, who arrived with entourage, Francis Weiss, and everybody who said, Christian Dior is a great man. We worked with him, and the people who already implemented, and Christian was a great man. He worked like we worked. Andrew Goodman, president of Bergdorf Goodman, was reported to have said, Dior is really one of a kind. We'd like to work for him. He teaches a lot of things and he exchanges the best thing. So that's funny. So not only he was brilliant creatively, because he was a charming man with his feet on the ground. That's what also was one of the testimonies of the the great American merchants from 7th Avenue who really all appreciated the impact of Christian Dior. And alors, we could also talk about the fascination of all the stars, American stars, cinema stars, who wanted to be dressed by Christian Dior. Here you see Rita Hayworth, but on others. And so we ended very quickly, no? Because we had other American, we had photos of other American actresses. We had Rita Hayworth. Here Rita was just missed. Here it goes to avant-garde. No, here it goes to Lauren Bacall. No. Lauren. We just missed Lauren Bacall. We just see her never. But avant-garde was another one. Yes, avant-garde. Anyway, well, you know that you can trust me. They were there. If we don't see them.
Sorry that I can't see very well.
And then, in fact, yes, we go a little bit sort of all kinds of ways, but Christian Dior was pleased. Voila. Christian Dior was extremely pleased. Women have instantly understood that I dream of making them not only more beautiful, but happier. As we have gone over time, I think we should perhaps stay on that. This is the interior. This is the picture taken from the atelier of Christian Dior on Fifth Avenue.
So this is a picture of Christian Dior in New York,
In
like
New York,
his atelier.
Yes, exactly.
And what is this? What is this image?
It's just, the work. It's just a fitting session of fittings. Christian Dior with his sort of long cane, giving directions of how this should be, either restricted and whatever. He's in his role of master couturier.
Yeah, and I think it would be very interesting for all of us here to learn how Jacques Rouet created a system that would help Christian Dior internationalize, and that was really modeled after the American experience. Yes,
responding to the ambition of Christian Dior to really install his brand in America. Jacques Rouet, who was his director, his manager, had to devised a system which was quite clever, whereby every buyer who attended the collection showing Avenue Montaigne would pay a deposit which was applied to their first purchase. Dressed, produced under these patterns, so in other words, Maison Christian Dior was furnishing all the elements needed to make a dress, the model, the map, I mean the model, they were giving actually an exactly sort of other patterns, absolutely giving the patterns so that they could be reproduced by an American store. And they were also giving the material that went with it, the proper buttons, gown, whatever, the style of material, the material and everything that went into a store. They were giving all this to an American manufacturers, and he could then sell it under the name Dior, but there were two characteristics. So dresses produced under these patterns could be sold under the Dior name. For instance, an American woman ordering a dress from Bendel would find a tag which said Christian Dior, written in large types, and Bendel in smaller letters. For the less high-end category, the buyer received a simple paper pattern that gave manufacturers more liberty to put, so in other words, they both had understood, provided a system, proposed a system to Americans that made them very flexible, depending on what they wanted to do with their clientele, and was given a number which was registered. Every garment, wanted to finish. The buyer received a simple pattern that gave manufacturers more liberty to put an American spin on their choice of fabrics and colors, because, of course, America wanted to produce for all levels of society. In France, you still only had a level of women that were dressed in haute couture and the others in prêt-à-porter, but these two things were in America, it was much more flexible and much more. So, however, that doesn't mean that a problem. Every garment that left the Maison Dior was given a number, which was registered on the list, ultimately handed over to the customs before boarding, and the clothes would leave on a special haute couture plane headed to New York. Voila. So that's one thing. And this really, what was quite remarkable is the brand's, Dior's brand, dizzying expansion. 50% of CD's revenues was made in the US, and the next step for the company was to create licenses. New York Perfumes Inc. was created in 1948. Christian de Haugery was created in 1949, and in 50, a licensing agreement for ties and the Christian Dior diffusion department charged with in any case, it continued and continued. And the expansion went beyond. I mean, the kick start that the expansion, the American expansion, the expansion of Dior in America was kind of a model of what would come in the rest of the world, because Dior in the next few years would cover the 5 continents and sell in 5 different continents. Italy, the first one was London, Italy, and Dior's reputation was fixed once and for all once he appeared on the cover of Time magazine in 1957. The house deserved a blue ribbon, as industry professionals were quick to say. I don't think we want to continue on this text, perhaps, because we have arrived at the moment where Christian Dior is at his maximum. The sad part of the story is that the sad aspect of that story is that he devoted himself so much to his business, and the business was kind of in a completely creative expansion. There was no limit to the needs of involving him in the decisions and whatever. And so Christian Dior's health and Christian Dior has really sort of was really attacked, and ultimately he died in 1957. In September 1957, he embarked on what would be his final trip. The journey was supposed to last a month, but the second day of his arrival, he was found with, died of a heart attack. Voila. But I think, I'm sorry that it was such a haphazard conference. I'm so sorry. Thank you for your patience and your nonetheless for your sympathy. But
we're very grateful for your writing this book about Christian Dior, for coming all the way from France here to talk about it. And the book is being sold on the entrance of the Katie Murphy, and so Marie-France will be signing books next to the bookstore. So if you would like to purchase a book, she'll be happy to sign it for you upstairs. So thank you again for being here tonight. Thank you, Marie-France.
Thank you to you.